Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. All right. That was an energizing introduction. Let's see the energy in the audience. Thank you for being here this morning. And my name is Saji Prelis. I wear two hats. One hat I wear is directing Search for Common Ground children and youth programs. Search for Common Ground is an international conflict transformation peace-building organization operating in about 35 countries around the world, and we are celebrating our 33rd year doing this kind of work. The second hat I wear is directing the UN Interagency Working Group on Youth and Peace Building. So it's a real big privilege for me to be here. But I also want to, before I get started, I want to thank Partnership for Change for its leadership and thought leadership in this topic of looking at young people, the role young people play constructively in societies. And they have been talking about this topic for many years. And this is one of the culminations of that ongoing discussion itself. So to the Partnership for Change's leadership, I thank you for that. I want to see who is in the audience. Raise of hands, anyone from the government is here. Business leaders. Keep your hands up. Any youth leaders? Fantastic. NGOs? Awesome. Wow, I'm at home then. Anybody else I've missed? Private sector, I identified? Anyone else? Who else is in the audience? Yes, sir. Fair, thank you. Yes, any educators in the audience? Good. The reason I'm asking you this is so that this conversation today doesn't just happen here. Today's conversation is going to start here, but we want to engage you in this dialogue as well. To get started, we've recognized that today's world, we are living in we have the largest generation of young people living today on this planet. 1.8 billion people are below the age of 25. 1.8 billion. Out of that, over 50%, close to 60% in a lot of conflict-affected countries, populations are below the age of 25 or 30. Some countries like Niger, you're looking at a 73% population, Nigeria 73% under the age of 25. So you're looking at countries where there's large proportions of young people. But recent attacks in Nigeria, Kenya, Tunisia, and a few years ago, even in this country, have reminded us the threat violent extremism poses, and that no country or community is immune to it. But the world leaders are very slow at recognizing how to engage young people. In the last few years, actually, violent extremism is not a new phenomenon. It's not a new phenomenon. It takes new shades, and new responses are based on current understanding of issues. But if you look in the last hundreds of years, there has been violent extremism over the last hundreds of years. The tools people have used to commit violent extremism or terrorist acts have been different. But the world leaders have yet to recognize the potential that large 1.8 billion people have. Traditionally, they've looked at this demographic as a threat, or a burden, or a problem to solve. But the world is shifting. A great number of people are now talking about that this generation is not a threat or a burden, but a demographic opportunity, and also a democratic imperative that we engage this youthful population in a meaningful way. Comprehensive strategies are needed. Collective security requires collective solutions. If this issue of violent extremism is in our own backyards and no country or community is immune to it, it's a collective security issue, and it requires collective solutions. So to get things started today, it's my distinct pleasure and an honor to introduce one of your homegrown sheroes who have championed this issue in this country, but also has seen young people as partners in this process. So please join me in welcoming your very own State Secretary to the Prime Minister, Laila Bokhari. Thank you.
Dear all of you, very good morning to all of you. I'd like to thank the Partnership for Change for organizing this session today, and I'd like to thank all of you for being here. I look forward to the conversation now and afterwards. The topic of today's session, the morning session, is a topic which I think you will agree we are all concerned with. It concerns not only the youth and the countries of the Middle East, of Syria and Iraq and the surrounding countries, not only conflict-ridden countries, not only the images of school children, all those, we bear those in mind, the school children of Nigeria or Pakistan as victims of terrorism. But as we know, extremism and factors that feed into terrorism can come in so many different forms. And we've sadly seen attacks in very different places around the world, big and small. We know this only too well also in Europe, in Australia, in the US, and so many other places. We have Paris and Copenhagen in mind, where freedom of speech, freedom of mind, freedom of our minorities were severely threatened. Some people say terrorism and violent extremism is on the rise. Groups like ISIL or Daesh and Boko Haram are spreading the message of hate. Hate. And they do it across borders. And we keep in mind the horrendous attacks in Paris, as mentioned, and the Charlie Hebdo, and also the brutal attack in Peshawar, Pakistan, at the end of last year, when more than 100 school children and their teachers were brutally massacred by the Taliban. It is in times like these that we must all stand united, united to keep on fighting for the values that we believe in and are so dear to us, not only from podiums like this, but in every action that we do. For democracy, the big word democracy, for openness, the big word of openness, the big word of free speech, and the big word of right to education. On 22nd of July 2011, Norway experienced the horrors of terrorism. 77 people, most of them youth at a summer camp, a youth camp, were killed. Our government building is still today in ruins. Now, there was only one perpetrator in this crime, one lone wolf. But although he acted alone and was so-called self-radicalized, his ideology, his worldview, and his narrative emerged from a social movement. His ideology of hate and intolerance was developed through interaction with others, through one of the most powerful forums that we have today, the internet. Sites where right-wing extremist ideas today flourish, and still today flourish. This was not met with censorship and the closing of websites. Our response was the big words of openness, more freedom and more democracy. Now we must meet the extremists with arguments, with counter-arguments. Now this is not an easy task, and many of you in the room will know this. We must give our youth, ourselves, the tools to do so, and we must, as adults, be aware of what language we use. At the moment in Europe, we have examples of marches, Pegida marches, among others, that originated in Germany, also in other countries of Europe. The marches against immigrants have fewer and fewer participants, but they are there. Pegida marched against influence of Islam, against immigration, against multiculturalism. Yet at the same time, there were thousands marching against, or rather for, multiculturalism, for humanity, for openness and democracy. There have been marches on both sides. There have been debates and arguments on both sides. and what it turns out is testimony of the debates that lie in front of us. Before us is the danger that splits society. Now let's get the debates up on the surface and let's discuss them. This requires brave leadership and it requires brave youth voices. It requires that we are ready to take on these debates. We need therefore places for debate and knowledge. What has inspired me the last year has been the many, many Muslim youth voices and others, youth voices that have come out and said, this is not my Islam, looking to Syria. This is not done in my name, looking to Iraq. They have themselves, as Norwegians, as Europeans, stood up and confronted the extremists bravely with words, speeches, been vocal in our public debates. Youth in Norway initiated the peace ring around the synagogue of Oslo. Now this initiative has taken place other places in Europe as well, but more needs to be done from all of us, whether we are educators, politicians, whether we are business leaders or youth leaders. We need to stand together with one voice. We need to encourage initiatives like the ones I've mentioned. We need to encourage brave voices, but we also need to be ready to defend these brave voices, to defend them and to protect them. Terrorism has always been a war of ideologies, of ideas. Nothing new about terrorism, as was said here. But extremists cannot be given the monopoly of the voices, of the ideas. Rather, the extremists are the odd ones out. They're the alternative. They're the isolated narrative. We must make them the isolated narrative. Our core values of peace, tolerance, democracy, human rights, and freedom of expression are what the extremists are fighting, but they're also exploiting it. As we see young, disillusioned citizens in our communities, be they second-generation immigrants or converts or others, we need to increase efforts to make them feel part of our society. They are our own youth. Those who deviate come from very different backgrounds. Some are very well educated, some are petty criminals, some are adventurers. Some have fallen out in search of an identity, in search of a belonging, in search of a narrative, a voice to believe in. Communication is always important. Now, ISIL, Daesh, is using the internet, as I mentioned, to spread its extremist ideology through social media, the same media that we love, that we all use, the social media and other channels of communication. Its reach goes beyond national borders, far beyond the Middle East. Although we know that the greatest burden really lies with the countries in Syria and Iraq and surrounding countries, we know that it inspires every day, every minute, youth as far away as Norway. Norwegians have traveled to join Daesh and other extremist groups in Syria and Iraq. Many thousands have traveled from Europe. Thousands have traveled from other countries in Africa, Asia, Middle East, the US. There's something there which we cannot quite figure out. Foreign terrorist fighters has become a term that many of our countries are currently trying to develop policies around. Most importantly, how do we prevent our youth, our own citizens, from traveling to Syria, to Iraq, to join ISIL? But also, how do we prepare home communities for the possibility of their return? Because they are our youth, and they will return to our societies.